Good afternoon, everyone. I want to say thank you to the organizing committee for awarding me this second prize. I'm really honored, and I'm really happy to be here today. And they asked me, before I start talking about the research, to reflect on my experience during this conference this week. So, hold your horses. First of all, the caipirinhas were really strong the first day. I mean, I like them, and they were so strong, so I only had to take two, and I was as drunk as I ever went. Okay, researchers that are networking are very loud, with lots of noise everywhere, and that's great because that means that there are discussions and friends meeting up again, so that was amazing. The air conditionings work really well, especially in the first day. They worked very well, and I think they fixed this issue, and I'm really happy that I can now wear my nice outfit again. Food was amazing. Meeting rooms varied from very large, like this one, to very small, like the one downstairs. People are so friendly in Brazil, really. I mean, the taxi driver knew that I wasn't speaking any Portuguese, and he was just talking about where to go and how our day was and stuff like that. It was great. The weather is either very wet or very dry, like today, very, very wet. Karaoke is a big thing. I went to karaoke yesterday. I didn't sing a song because I'm Dutch, so I don't dare to do that kind of thing. And the talks varied from phytoplankton to these integrated river management, so we covered all the different aspects of limnology, which was a really great experience for me, because I'm a fish ecologist focusing on rivers. Yeah, so my favorite talk was actually the keynote of David Tickner. I'm sorry for the others, but thank you, David. Yeah, so he presented this gradient of being a fundamental scientist or being an activist scientist, and that we all fit somewhere in between, and that you have to make your own decisions. And I really loved that talk about that. And me, as a former conservationist, I really like more on the conservation side of things. So you will see that in my talk as well. But also, I like the fundamental science. So, yeah, so I loved learning about the research in Brazil and the other South American countries, so thanks a lot for opening my eyes to also this part of the world. And, well, there was no fish keynote talk, so I guess I need to take the stage and talk a bit about fish now. Only one remark, that I am Dutch, so I am blunt, so I will just state it here, we need to connect more with social scientists. There was also the Building Bridges theme of this conference. But then we put all the social scientists in the smallest conference rooms, which were completely full, and people wanted to get in and couldn't find a spot. So I think for the next SIL conference, we should give more space to these social science talks and the researchers that do this amazing work, in which we really need to communicate with as natural scientists, because we speak different languages, as we all know. Okay, now we're going to focus a bit more on fish. Because as you have seen, the fish behind me, these were the fish that were part of my research, and my research was, or one of my chapters of my thesis was about how long do these restored floodplain channels remain suitable for targeted rheophilic fishes. I did this PhD research at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. I now work as a postdoc at IGB in Berlin, in which I continue with this research, but then more on a European scale. So, as you can see here, you see here a typical river, the River Waal in the Netherlands, and what you can see is the floodplain and the main river. So you see here the main river is this part and the floodplain is there. So that was in the 1850s, and what you can see here is that it's a really wide and shallow river system, including floodplains. That changed over time due to anthropogenic changes, so we started to deepen out our rivers for transport. The floodplains were sort of claimed and they were drained. And then in the 1950s, we actually made the river even deeper. We got rid of all the floodplains because we needed to get land for farming. We wanted to live here, so we built dikes, so we have cities that have dry feet. And this resulted in a loss of river floodplain connectivity, so no floodplains at all, and the loss of habitat heterogeneity, because this, for fish, is just a highway. Why is this so important? Why do we need this connectivity, and why do we need this heterogeneity of habitats? Well, if you look at the life history of a typical river fish. You see that there are different stages. You see the adults that need a certain spawning habitat. Then you see here the larvae. They need nursery habitat. They have a small daily activity area, so they don't travel far. But they need to move from their refuge habitat to their feeding habitats, because if you are a fish, you want to eat, and you don't want to get eaten. So that's the most important. So this is really important, that these refuge habitats and feeding habitats are connected. And when you then grow taller, smaller, bigger, then you have a wider range of activity in which you perform your refuge and your feeding. And then you have winter habitats and you have growth habitats, and it is all connected on different spatial scales. So we need to have that connectivity between the river and the floodplains, and within the floodplains, these different habitats. So that heterogeneity of habitats is really important for fish to complete their whole life cycle. And that changes if you look at the different trophical guilds, for instance. You have the rheophilic fishes on the left and on the right, which are flow-loving species. They prefer flowing water. Left down, you have the eurytopic species that just, well, if there's water, they will be there. And you have limnophilic species that prefer standing water and water plants. And they all need different kinds of nursery habitats and wintering habitats and growth habitats. So back to the Netherlands, back to the River Waal. So we also noticed that, the river managers noticed that the fish communities were declining, and we really need to do something. And we had major flooding in the 94, 95 in the Netherlands. We decided to create more room for the rivers. So what we did is we created more space in which the river could, let's say, put all the excess water in winter times. So we have now these floodplains back. So what we did since the 1990s, we restored these floodplains, we dug new channels, we reconnected new old lakes, and it looks a bit like this. And now we have sort of 4 different river restoration measures implemented in the Netherlands. We have these two-sided connected channels on the right, which is connected on 2 sides, as well, it's obvious. You have these one-sided connected channels. You have these isolated waters that receive water from the river, let's say in winter times and high water levels, so fish flow in there. And you have these tidal channels close to the North Sea, in which you have the tidal movement of water, which then provides home for certain specific species. So my talk focuses on the one-sided and two-sided connected channels, because that's the chapter of my PhD that I'm going to talk about, but I evaluated the functioning of all these different restoration projects in the Netherlands in my PhD. So this is the River Rhine in the Netherlands. If you didn't know where the Netherlands was, you see these 12 projects that I evaluated, and we used 3 different data sets from 1997 to 2020 to evaluate the functioning of these floodplain channels. Overall, my whole project, my PhD project, we caught over 1.5 million larval and juvenile fishes. We also needed to identify them. So I had 19 thesis and internship students to help me out with that. So really, thank you. You're not in this room, but I really appreciate all your help, because I couldn't do all the 1.5 million fishes alone. 38 fish species. We collected 46 environmental variables per sampling site. We had 43 hectares of potential nursery habitat that we surveyed. And in total, we had 46 floodplain restoration projects and 26 control sites in this study. So it's an enormous study. Lots of money went into it from Rijkswaterstaat, the National Water Authority. So these are the targets, the target species for many of these river restoration projects, because these rheophilic fishes are really in decline, and these are just 5 of the cyprinid rheophilic species that occur in the River Rhine. They all look alike, especially when they are really small, so you really need to look into identification of these species. So we saw that since 1990s, despite these restoration efforts, we didn't see any increase in the rheophilic abundances in the main channel. We even saw a slight decline. And also in the number of species, we didn't see a lot of improvement. So something wasn't going right here in these restored floodplains. So what we saw is that if we had these 46 environmental variables, and we could sort of see what was happening in these floodplain channels over time. So you start with a bare floodplain channel that was recently dug out. It was just sand, nothing happened there. And then over time, with Project H, you see that you have these, let's say, these sandbanks occurring. You have vegetation on the shoreline. You have more sand depositions. You have this heterogeneity in habitats happening in the development of these floodplains. And at a certain point, if you see here, you see that there's a plug, there's a sand plug in the entrance of the floodplain, and you see that there's lots of, well, it gets overgrown by plants and vegetation. So that had an effect on the fish communities, how they respond, how they use these floodplains. So as you can see here, especially for the rheophilic fishes, we saw a really clear trend. So you see on the x-axis the age of the floodplain, and on the y-axis you see abundances in a log scale. And what we saw is that the abundances of rheophilic fishes really had a peak after 10, 15 years. So that means that the functioning of these floodplains is really optimal after 10, 15 years for these fishes. If you then look at the species richness, you see that fish find their way immediately. So you have higher species diversity in the beginning of these initial stages of these restoration projects, and then it declines gradually with these rheophilic species. So, to conclude, there's no concluding slides, that's fine. So, what I actually want to say here is that you have this optimum of rheophilic fish abundances, let's say halfway during our study, let's say 10, 12, 15 years, but you saw the immediate decline in species richness. So if you want to manage these floodplains in a way that you support the rheophilic fish communities, you really want to have cyclic management activities there. So you want to remove this sand plug, for instance, in the entrance of the floodplain every 8 to 10 years to optimize your restoration efforts and to really facilitate these rheophilic fishes that you focus on initially in these floodplain design. So I have lots of more to tell, but I'm not going to do that now, but you can ask me questions afterwards. Thanks a lot for this opportunity and for your attention.